I am Maya, 33 years old, and my family has always treated my ambitions like a joke they were tired of hearing. At my brother Andre's housewarming party, he raised a glass of cheap champagne and announced to a room full of our parents' upscale friends that not everyone can afford a two-bedroom apartment staring right at me. Everyone laughed, and my mother simply patted my arm and told me not to ruin his night just because my app idea failed. But the room went dead silent when my Aunt Vivian took a sip of her drink and asked if that was why I had just paid cash for a five-bedroom estate in the Heights. Before I tell you how I burned their illusions to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your empire while your own blood prayed for your downfall. The clinking of crystal and the low hum of conversation filled the oppressive heat of the leased downtown apartment. My brother Andre insisted on calling it a luxury penthouse, but anyone with a measuring tape could see it barely pushed 1,200 square feet. The air conditioning was struggling against the body heat of 40 guests, but the arrogance in the room was thick enough to choke on. Andre stood by the faux marble kitchen island, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored suit that our parents, Valerie and DeAndre, had undoubtedly financed to help him keep up appearances. Next to him stood Chloe, his 32-year-old wife. Chloe was a white woman whose entire personality revolved around displaying designer bags she did not pay for and offering unsolicited advice to people who never asked. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder and leaned into Andre, holding a flute of sparkling wine that tasted suspiciously like a $20 grocery store special, attempting to pass as vintage. Our parents circulated through the crowded room with practiced ease. They had invited half of their affluent African-American social circle to witness their golden child's latest supposed triumph. DeAndre was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, boasting loudly about Andre's consulting business to a group of local politicians and medical professionals. Valerie was micromanaging the catering staff, ensuring every guest saw her playing the role of the proud, successful matriarch who had raised a brilliant son. I stood quietly near the narrow hallway, sipping sparkling water, counting the minutes until I could politely excuse myself and escape the suffocating atmosphere of their shared delusion. Then Andre tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the smooth rhythm and blues music playing softly from the wireless speakers. The room hushed immediately, turning their attention to the golden boy. He wrapped one arm securely around Chloe's waist and raised his glass high, flashing that charismatic practiced smile that had gotten him out of trouble since we were children. He launched into his usual speech about hard work, about building a legacy, about the undeniable prestige of downtown living and taking his consulting firm to the next level. I listened mechanically, having heard variations of this monologue at every family dinner for the past decade, and then his eyes found mine across the room. The smirk that spread across his face was a weapon I had known intimately since childhood, a silent promise that he was about to elevate himself by stepping directly on my neck. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this incredible milestone, Andre announced, his voice projecting easily over the attentive crowd. It takes a certain kind of relentless drive to secure a luxury property in this highly competitive market. As I was just telling my little sister Maya earlier tonight, you really have to possess real vision and financial discipline to make it in this world. After all, not everyone can afford a two-bedroom apartment in the city. The room erupted in laughter. It was not a polite, subdued chuckle. It was a collective, condescending wave of amusement from people who had been fed a very specific, carefully curated narrative about my life. I saw Chloe snicker behind her manicured hand, leaning over to whisper something in the ear of one of her friends. Both of them glanced my way with undisguised pity and amusement. My stomach tightened, not from the insult itself, but from the absolute chilling normalization of it. I looked toward my parents. DeAndre was nodding proudly, raising his glass toward his son in a gesture of profound respect. Before I could even part my lips to defend myself, a hand clamped down hard on my forearm. It was my mother, Valerie. Her manicured acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin as she pulled me slightly backward, physically shielding Andre from any potential retaliation I might offer. Her smile remained fixed perfectly in place for the benefit of the guests watching us, but her voice was a sharp, urgent hiss directly in my ear. Do not say a word, Maya. Do not you dare ruin your brother's night just because your little app idea did not pan out the way you wanted it to. You know how incredibly hard he works to maintain his image. Just smile, be supportive, and let him have his moment in the sun. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, feeling a profound sense of detachment wash over my initial anger. This was their dynamic established through years of repetition through actions rather than words. Andre could hurl insults, belittle my career, and publicly mock my supposed financial instability, and my parents would actively silence my defense to protect his fragile ego. They still viewed me as the struggling dreamer, the stubborn daughter who refused to take a safe corporate job and instead wasted her 20s hunched over a laptop building software nobody understood. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to gently remove my mother's hand from my arm and walk out the front door without a backward glance. I was done participating in their theater. But before I could move, a smooth, commanding voice sliced through the dying laughter in the room. Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house in the Heights, Maya? The entire room froze. Every head snapped toward the corner where my Aunt Vivian stood, dressed in impeccable silk, holding her cocktail with the casual grace of a woman who missed absolutely nothing. She stepped deliberately into the center of the room. She looked around the cramped, overpriced apartment with a subtle expression of disdain, then turned her sharp, observant eyes directly to me. I said, "Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house in the Heights?" Vivian repeated, her voice carrying beautifully into the sudden, suffocating silence. Because a 2-bedroom apartment simply was not enough space for you. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the struggling air conditioning unit and the distant wail of a siren out on the city streets. DeAndre's proud smile vanished, instantly replaced by a deep, stormy scowl. Valerie's grip on my arm loosened as she stared at her sister-in-law in pure shock. Andre let out a harsh, nervous scoff, desperately trying to regain control of his captive audience. He waved his free hand dismissively, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. Come on, Aunt Vivian, let us not exaggerate to make Maya feel better. Rentals do not count. Anyone can scrape together first and last month's rent for a couple of months before the eviction notices start coming. You cannot fake real wealth, Maya. We all know how your startup has been struggling. Chloe chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that thinly veiled her racial microaggressions. It is okay to admit you are still finding your footing, Maya. Andre and I could always recommend a good financial planner to help you budget better. It is so important to live within your means. My father stepped forward, the physical intimidation he used to control our household rolling off him in waves. His voice dropped to a dangerous patriarchal register that demanded immediate submission. Vivian stopped filling her head with nonsense. And Maya, I will not have you embarrassing your brother in his own home with these ridiculous lies. You are making a fool of yourself in front of our friends. Apologize to Andre and let us move on. I looked at my father, then at my brother, and finally at Chloe's smug, expectant face. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or engage in the desperate defensive shouting matches that had characterized my early 20s. I simply reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my smartphone. With 3 quick taps, I accessed the apartment's open wireless network. Andre, in his desperation to show off his modern lifestyle, had bragged earlier about his fully integrated smart home system, leaving the casting feature on his massive 75-inch television completely open. I swiped my finger across the screen. The television, which had been displaying a looping, carefully curated slideshow of Andre and Chloe's luxury vacations funded by credit card debt, suddenly went black. A second later, a high-resolution, meticulously scanned legal document materialized on the massive screen for every single guest in the room to see. It was a property deed. The room erupted in a chorus of sharp gasps and bewildered murmurs. The guests leaned in, squinting at the glowing screen. There, in undeniable black and white legal text, was my full name, listed as the sole proprietor of a sprawling historic estate located in the Heights, the most exclusive, fiercely guarded neighborhood in the entire state. Below the property description, highlighting the 5 bedrooms, the acreage, and the luxury amenities, was the financial clearance section. Paid in full. Cash transaction. Zero mortgage recorded. I watched the color completely drain from my brother's face. The smug, superior grin melted off his features, leaving behind a slack-jawed expression of pure panic. Chloe dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending cheap champagne splashing across her expensive designer heels, but nobody even looked her way. Every eye was locked on the television screen. DeAndre's chest heaved. He pushed his way through the crowd, marching directly up to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and aggressive suspicion. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "What kind of stunt is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the pressure of his collapsing reality. "A house in the Heights costs upwards of $2 million. Whose money did you borrow for this, Maya? What kind of fraudulent scheme have you gotten yourself involved in? Tell me right now whose money you stole to afford a $2.5 million estate." I looked at the man who had spent my entire life telling me I would amount to nothing unless I followed his precise, outdated instructions. I looked at the mother who had shushed me to protect the ego of a mediocre man. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the tension in the room stretch until it was nearly unbearable. I lowered my glass and smiled, a calm, deeply satisfied expression that I knew would haunt them for years to come. "I did not borrow a single dime. Dad," I said, my voice steady, clear, and echoing perfectly in the dead silence of the apartment. "And I certainly did not steal it. I sold my fintech company to a global banking consortium for $14 million yesterday morning." I let my eyes slowly sweep over the stunned faces of their wealthy friends, ensuring they absorbed every single syllable of my reality. Then I looked directly back at my brother, who was staring at me as if I had just materialized from thin air. "Thanks for the cheap champagne, Andre," I added smoothly. "But you are right about one thing. Not everyone can afford to live in the city. Some of us prefer the estates." I turned on my heel, the click of my shoes sounding like gunshots against the floorboards. I linked arms with Aunt Vivian, who was smiling like she had just won the lottery, and walked straight out the front door, leaving my family choking on the ashes of their shattered illusions. I am Maya, 33 years old, and my family has always treated my ambitions like a joke they were tired of hearing. At my brother Andre's housewarming party, he raised a glass of cheap champagne and announced to a room full of our parents' upscale friends that not everyone can afford a two-bedroom apartment, staring right at me. Everyone laughed, and my mother simply patted my arm and told me not to ruin his night just because my app idea failed. But the room went dead silent when my Aunt Vivian took a sip of her drink and asked if that was why I had just paid cash for a 5-bedroom estate in the Heights. Before I tell you how I burned their illusions to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your empire while your own blood prayed for your downfall. The clinking of crystal and the low hum of conversation filled the oppressive heat of the leased downtown apartment. My brother Andre insisted on calling it a luxury penthouse, but anyone with a measuring tape could see it barely pushed 1,200 square feet. The air conditioning was struggling against the body heat of 40 guests, but the arrogance in the room was thick enough to choke on. Andre stood by the faux marble kitchen island, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored suit that our parents Valerie and DeAndre had undoubtedly financed to help him keep up appearances. Next to him stood Chloe, his 32-year-old wife. Chloe was a white woman whose entire personality revolved around displaying designer bags she did not pay for and offering unsolicited advice to people who never asked. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder and leaned into Andre, holding a flute of sparkling wine that tasted suspiciously like a $20 grocery store special, attempting to pass as vintage. Our parents circulated through the crowded room with practiced ease. They had invited half of their affluent African-American social circle to witness their golden child's latest supposed triumph. DeAndre was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, boasting loudly about Andre's consulting business to a group of local politicians and medical professionals. Valerie was micromanaging the catering staff, ensuring every guest saw her playing the role of the proud, successful matriarch who had raised a brilliant son. I stood quietly near the narrow hallway, sipping sparkling water, counting the minutes, until I could politely excuse myself and escape the suffocating atmosphere of their shared delusion. Then Andre tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the smooth rhythm and blues music playing softly from the wireless speakers. The room hushed immediately, turning their attention to the golden boy. He wrapped one arm securely around Chloe's waist and raised his glass high, flashing that charismatic practiced smile that had gotten him out of trouble since we were children. He launched into his usual speech about hard work, about building a legacy, about the undeniable prestige of downtown living, and taking his consulting firm to the next level. I listened mechanically, having heard variations of this monologue at every family dinner for the past decade. And then his eyes found mine across the room. The smirk that spread across his face was a weapon I had known intimately since childhood, a silent promise that he was about to elevate himself by stepping directly on my neck. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this incredible milestone," Andre announced, his voice projecting easily over the attentive crowd. "It takes a certain kind of relentless drive to secure a luxury property in this highly competitive market. As I was just telling my little sister Maya earlier tonight, you really have to possess real vision and financial discipline to make it in this world. After all, not everyone can afford a two-bedroom apartment in the city." The room erupted in laughter. It was not a polite, subdued chuckle. It was a collective, condescending wave of amusement from people who had been fed a very specific, carefully curated narrative about my life. I saw Chloe snicker behind her manicured hand, leaning over to whisper something in the ear of one of her friends. Both of them glanced my way with undisguised pity and amusement. My stomach tightened not from the insult itself, but from the absolute chilling normalization of it. I looked toward my parents. DeAndre was nodding proudly, raising his glass toward his son in a gesture of profound respect. Before I could even part my lips to defend myself, a hand clamped down hard on my forearm. It was my mother, Valerie. Her manicured acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin as she pulled me slightly backward, physically shielding Andre from any potential retaliation I might offer. Her smile remained fixed perfectly in place for the benefit of the guests watching us, but her voice was a sharp, urgent hiss directly in my ear. "Do not say a word, Maya. Do not you dare ruin your brother's night just because your little app idea did not pan out the way you wanted it to. You know how incredibly hard he works to maintain his image. Just smile, be supportive, and let him have his moment in the sun." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, feeling a profound sense of detachment wash over my initial anger. This was their dynamic established through years of repetition through actions rather than words. Andre could hurl insults, belittle my career, and publicly mock my supposed financial instability, and my parents would actively silence my defense to protect his fragile ego. They still viewed me as the struggling dreamer, the stubborn daughter who refused to take a safe corporate job and instead wasted her 20s hunched over a laptop building software nobody understood. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to gently remove my mother's hand from my arm and walk out the front door without a backward glance. I was done participating in their theater. But before I could move, a smooth, commanding voice sliced through the dying laughter in the room. "Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house in the Heights, Maya?" The entire room froze. Every head snapped toward the corner where my Aunt Vivian stood, dressed in impeccable silk, holding her cocktail with the casual grace of a woman who missed absolutely nothing. She stepped deliberately into the center of the room. She looked around the cramped, overpriced apartment with a subtle expression of disdain, then turned her sharp, observant eyes directly to me. I said, "Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house in the Heights?" Vivian repeated, her voice carrying beautifully into the sudden, suffocating silence. "Because a 2-bedroom apartment simply was not enough space for you." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the struggling air conditioning unit and the distant wail of a siren out on the city streets. DeAndre's proud smile vanished instantly, replaced by a deep, stormy scowl. Valerie's grip on my arm loosened as she stared at her sister-in-law in pure shock. Andre let out a harsh, nervous scoff, desperately trying to regain control of his captive audience. He waved his free hand dismissively, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "Come on, Aunt Vivian, let us not exaggerate to make Maya feel better. Rentals do not count. Anyone can scrape together first and last month's rent for a couple of months before the eviction notices start coming. You cannot fake real wealth, Maya." We all know how your startup has been struggling. Chloe chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that thinly veiled her racial microaggressions. It is okay to admit you are still finding your footing, Maya. Andre and I could always recommend a good financial planner to help you budget better. It is so important to live within your means. My father stepped forward, the physical intimidation he used to control our household rolling off him in waves. His voice dropped to a dangerous patriarchal register that demanded immediate submission. Vivian stopped filling her head with nonsense. And Maya, I will not have you embarrassing your brother in his own home with these ridiculous lies. You are making a fool of yourself in front of our friends. Apologize to Andre and let us move on. I looked at my father, then at my brother, and finally at Chloe's smug, expectant face. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or engage in the desperate defensive shouting matches that had characterized my early 20s. I simply reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my smartphone. With 3 quick taps, I accessed the apartment's open wireless network. Andre, in his desperation to show off his modern lifestyle, had bragged earlier about his fully integrated smart home system, leaving the casting feature on his massive 75-inch television completely open. I swiped my finger across the screen. The television, which had been displaying a looping, carefully curated slideshow of Andre and Chloe's luxury vacations, funded by credit card debt, suddenly went black. A second later, a high-resolution, meticulously scanned legal document materialized on the massive screen for every single guest in the room to see. It was a property deed. The room erupted in a chorus of sharp gasps and bewildered murmurs. The guests leaned in, squinting at the glowing screen. There, in undeniable black and white legal text, was my full name, listed as the sole proprietor of a sprawling historic estate located in the Heights, the most exclusive, fiercely guarded neighborhood in the entire state. Below the property description, highlighting the 5 bedrooms, the acreage, and the luxury amenities, was the financial clearance section. Paid in full. Cash transaction. Zero mortgage recorded. I watched the color completely drain from my brother's face. The smug, superior grin melted off his features, leaving behind a slack-jawed expression of pure panic. Chloe dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending cheap champagne splashing across her expensive designer heels, but nobody even looked her way. Every eye was locked on the television screen. DeAndre's chest heaved. He pushed his way through the crowd, marching directly up to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and aggressive suspicion. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "What kind of stunt is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the pressure of his collapsing reality. "A house in the Heights costs upwards of $2 million. Whose money did you borrow for this, Maya? What kind of fraudulent scheme have you gotten yourself involved in? Tell me right now whose money you stole to afford a $2.5 million estate." I looked at the man who had spent my entire life telling me I would amount to nothing unless I followed his precise, outdated instructions. I looked at the mother who had shushed me to protect the ego of a mediocre man. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the tension in the room stretch until it was nearly unbearable. I lowered my glass and smiled, a calm, deeply satisfied expression that I knew would haunt them for years to come. "I did not borrow a single dime. Dad," I said, my voice steady, clear and echoing perfectly in the dead silence of the apartment. "And I certainly did not steal it. I sold my fintech company to a global banking consortium for $14 million yesterday morning." I let my eyes slowly sweep over the stunned faces of their wealthy friends, ensuring they absorbed every single syllable of my reality. Then I looked directly back at my brother, who was staring at me as if I had just materialized from thin air. "Thanks for the cheap champagne, Andre," I added smoothly. "But you are right about one thing. Not everyone can afford to live in the city. Some of us prefer the estates." I turned on my heel, the click of my shoes sounding like gunshots against the floorboards. I linked arms with Aunt Vivian, who was smiling like she had just won the lottery, and walked straight out the front door, leaving my family choking on the ashes of their shattered illusions. The notification chime from my perimeter security system broke the silence of my home office. Less than 24 hours had passed since I walked out of Andre's leased apartment, leaving my family choking on the reality of my $14 million exit. I tapped the tablet on my mahogany desk, bringing up the live feed from the front gates. A commercial delivery truck was pulling through, bringing the custom dining chairs I had ordered from Italy. But right on its bumper, moving fast enough to trigger a proximity warning, was a white Mercedes SUV. I recognized the license plate immediately. It was Andre's leased vehicle. They did not even pause at the intercom. My brother tailgated the delivery truck straight onto my property, completely ignoring the private estate signs. I watched the camera feed as the Mercedes parked aggressively on the circular driveway tires, crushing the edge of my freshly manicured landscaping. 4 doors opened simultaneously. Out stepped DeAndre, Valerie, Andre, and Chloe. They did not look like people coming to apologize for decades of disrespect. They moved with a synchronized, predatory entitlement, marching up the bluestone steps to my front entrance. By the time I left my office and reached the top of the floating glass staircase, my front doors were wide open. The delivery men were holding a heavy wooden crate, looking bewildered as my family simply pushed past them into the grand foyer. "Make sure you wipe your feet," Valerie instructed the delivery men, her tone dripping with unearned authority. "Put those boxes in the sitting room for now. We will decide where they go later." I stood at the top of the stairs watching the sheer audacity unfold. My mother was already directing traffic in a house she did not own. Chloe had her smartphone out, recording the 20-foot crystal chandelier hanging above the entryway, panning the camera across the imported marble floors. DeAndre had his hands clasped behind his back, nodding in patriarchal approval as he inspected the crown molding, acting as if he were the master of the estate, surveying his newly conquered territory. "You can leave the chairs right there, gentlemen," I called out, my voice slicing through the cavernous space. I walked down the steps slowly, letting the sharp click of my heels command the room. I tipped the delivery drivers, generously signed the manifest, and watched them close the heavy double doors behind them. Once the heavy oak doors sealed shut, the temperature in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees. I turned to face my family. They stood in my home, breathing my air entirely uninvited. "I do not recall authorizing guest access at the gate," I said, maintaining a perfectly level tone, "or extending an invitation." Valerie stepped forward, waving her hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. She wore a tailored pantsuit that screamed old money aspirations, her hair immaculately pressed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maya. Family does not need an invitation. We wanted to see the new house. You could have saved us a trip if you had simply answered your phone this morning instead of acting so secretive." Acting secretive. That was the angle she was choosing. Not a single word about the humiliation they tried to put me through the night before. Not a syllable of remorse for letting Andre mock me in front of 30 people. I folded my arms. There is a difference between secretive and peaceful, mother. I prefer the latter. Now why are you trespassing on my property? DeAndre puffed out his chest, stepping into my personal space to use his physical size as an intimidation tactic. "This is exactly the kind of hostility we are talking about," he barked. "Your mother and I came all this way to congratulate you properly away from the crowds, and you greet us with accusations. You need to fix your attitude. A house this size requires a level head and proper management. Clearly, you are already overwhelmed." I held his gaze, completely unfazed by the booming baritone that used to terrify me as a child. "I am managing a $14 million portfolio perfectly fine without your supervision, Dad. I certainly do not need help managing my front door." Andre stepped around our father, a greasy, calculating smile plastered across his face. He rubbed his hands together, looking up at the vaulted ceilings. "I have to admit, little sister, you really pulled one over on us. 14 million. That is a solid exit for a first-time founder. Of course, the taxes are going to eat you alive if you do not shelter it properly. But we can handle that. The place has good bones. Needs a little warming up, maybe some different art. But it is a respectable start. We can handle that. The royal we." The immediate assumption that my capital was now a shared family resource. Before I could address Andre's blatant entitlement, Valerie moved closer, reaching out to touch the fabric of my silk blouse. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for the desperate approval-seeking girl I used to be. When she did not find her, she shifted seamlessly into her most lethal weapon: the historical rewrite. "We are just so incredibly proud of you, Maya." Valerie cooed, her voice softening into a counterfeit warmth. "I was telling your father on the ride over everything we did, all the hard lessons we taught you. It all finally paid off. Look at what you have built. Look at the resilience we instilled in you." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the Olympic-level mental gymnastics unfolding in my foyer. "You think you instilled resilience in me?" "Of course we did," Valerie insisted, her tone taking on a defensive edge of righteousness. "You always were so sensitive, so quick to give up when things got hard. If we had coddled you the way you wanted, if we had financed every little whim and daydream you had, you never would have developed the thick skin required to survive in the tech industry. We had to be tough on you, Maya. It was tough love." "Tough love," I repeated, testing the bitter phrase on my tongue. "Yes, tough love," she affirmed, stepping fully into her delusional narrative. "We pushed you. When we refused to pay for those coding boot camps, it forced you to become resourceful. When your father told you to get a real job, it ignited your competitive drive. Even last night when we let Andre joke with you, we were testing your professional composure. We were hardening you for the real world. You are a multimillionaire today because we refused to make your life easy." The absolute audacity of her statement hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Valerie was standing in the foyer of a home I bought with blood, sweat, and panic attacks, looking me dead in the eye and demanding the credit for my survival. She was retroactively packaging 2 decades of emotional neglect, extreme favoritism, and financial abandonment as a masterclass in parenting. They had starved me of support, poured every ounce of their emotional and financial resources into Andre, and now that I had struck gold, they wanted to claim they had drawn the treasure map. "Let me make sure I understand this logic," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "When you told me I was wasting my life, that was a motivational tactic. When you refused to co-sign a loan for my first server space, but bought Andre a brand new luxury sedan the same week, that was an investment in my character." DeAndre nodded firmly, completely missing the danger in my tone. "Exactly. We knew Andre needed the presentation value for his consulting firm. You were working out of a basement. You needed grit. We gave you grit. You should be thanking us." I looked at my father, then at my mother, whose eyes were shining with expectant greed. They did not just want forgiveness, they wanted a reward. They genuinely expected me to compensate them for the trauma they had inflicted. They believed their cruelty was a service I had yet to pay the invoice for. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over my mind. For years, a small, wounded part of me had wondered if my success would finally earn their genuine love. Now, looking at them salivating over my marble floors, I realized they were entirely incapable of love. They only understood transactions. "You are absolutely right," I said softly. Valerie smiled, a triumphant, greedy gleam lighting up her features. She reached out, attempting to pull me into a hug. "I knew you would understand, sweetheart. I told your brother you would see the bigger picture." I took a sharp step back, dodging her embrace. Her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. "You taught me a lot about transactions, Mother." I continued, my gaze locking onto hers with unblinking intensity. "You taught me that support is conditional. You taught me that family is just a biological coincidence until money gets involved. But the most important thing your tough love taught me is how to recognize a bad investment. And I am looking at 4 terrible investments standing in my foyer." Valerie's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a tight, ugly grimace. DeAndre's face darkened with rage, his jaw clenching as he realized the manipulation was not working. Andre shifted his weight, glancing nervously at Chloe, who had suddenly stopped taking photos of my architecture. "Now," I said, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors they had just forced their way through. "Since we have cleared up the origins of my success, it is time for you to leave my house." But they were not going anywhere. The initial gaslighting had failed, and I could see the exact moment my family shifted from manipulative charm to aggressive entitlement. The polite masks were slipping, revealing the ravenous desperation underneath. They had bypassed my security to claim their piece of my empire, and they fully intended to extract their payment by any means necessary. My parents did not back down. Instead, DeAndre placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, physically steering me toward the expansive gourmet kitchen. Valerie followed close behind her heels, clicking on the hardwood as if she were inspecting a venue she had booked for a personal gala. "We are going to sit down and talk like a family," DeAndre boomed, gesturing forcefully toward the Marble Island bar stools. Enough of this childish disrespect. As they corralled me into the kitchen, I noticed Chloe slipping out of the foyer. She did not follow us into the kitchen. Instead, her eyes were glued to the sweeping glass staircase leading to the second-floor master suites. I made a mental note to check the perimeter monitors, but my parents were already crowding my personal space, blocking my exit. Valerie opened one of my custom oak cabinets, scoffing slightly at the sleek, minimalist coffee setup. "Look at this place. All this empty space for one person. You do not even cook, Maya. You never have. It is an absolute waste of potential." "It is my waste of potential," I replied, standing straight and refusing to take the seat my father was trying to force me into. "And you still have not answered my question. What are you doing in my house?" DeAndre leaned over the kitchen island, his massive frame casting a shadow across the marble. "We are here to make sure you do the right thing. You made $14 million overnight. 14 million. Do you have any idea what that kind of money means for our family? It means your brother can scale his business. It means your mother and I can retire comfortably without worrying about market swings. It means we can finally protect the family legacy." My company was not a family project, Dad. It was built on my blood, my late nights, and my private sacrifices. None of you offered a single dollar when I could not pay my rent 5 years ago. "Because you needed to learn," Valerie snapped, slamming the cabinet door shut with a sharp crack that echoed across the high ceilings. "Stop bringing up the past. We are talking about the present. You have more money than you could ever spend in 3 lifetimes, and your own brother is working 60 hours a week trying to keep his firm afloat. How do you think that looks to our friends at church? How do you think it looks to the community when the younger sister is swimming in millions and the eldest son is struggling?" Before I could respond to her absurd logic, the sound of rhythmic clicking heels echoed down the hallway. Chloe floated back into the kitchen, a glass of my imported sparkling water in one hand and her phone held high in the other. She was recording a video, panning her camera across my custom Italian cabinetry and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the infinity pool. She was completely oblivious to the war taking place in the room. "Oh, you guys," Chloe gushed, not even bothering to read the heavy tension in the air. She tapped her phone screen and looked directly at Valerie with a bright fake smile. "I just went upstairs to explore and I found it. The east-facing guest suite with the private terrace. It is literally a dream." I narrowed my eyes at her. "Excuse me?" Chloe turned to me, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder as if she were doing me a massive favor by simply occupying my square footage. "Maya, sweetie, the natural lighting in that room is an absolute miracle. The morning sun hits the vanity at the exact angle I need for my beauty tutorials. I am already drafting a complete rebrand for my channel. We can call it High Society Living with Chloe. I can film all my morning routines out on that terrace. It is going to elevate my brand so much." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the sheer, unadulterated delusion spilling from her mouth. "You went upstairs without my permission and picked out a room in my house for your social media videos." "Well, yeah," Chloe said, taking a casual sip from her glass. "I mean, you have 5 bedrooms and you live here all by yourself. It is not like you are using the space. Plus, having a lifestyle influencer creating content in the house will give your property so much organic exposure. It is a total win-win. Andre and I can move into the East Wing by this weekend." A cold, quiet rage began to circulate in my veins. But before I could tear Chloe's fantasy to shreds, Andre stepped up. He did not just join the conversation, he invaded my space. My brother stepped directly into my personal bubble, standing so close I could smell his expensive cologne. He towered over me, using the exact same aggressive posture DeAndre had used to control us when we were teenagers. "Let us cut the games!" Maya, Andre growled, his voice dropping into a harsh, demanding register that dropped all pretense of brotherly affection. "Chloe is right. You have more house than you know what to do with, but we can figure out the room assignments later. Right now, we need to talk about capital." "There is nothing to talk about," I said, my voice turning to ice, refusing to give an inch of ground. "There is plenty to talk about," Andre barked, slamming his open palm down against the marble counter. The sharp slap echoed violently through the open floor plan. You got lucky with some tech trend. Good for you. But real wealth stays in the family, and real leadership belongs to the person who carries the family name. My consulting firm is expanding. We are pivoting into enterprise logistics, and I need an immediate injection of liquidity. You mean your firm is failing because you spend more on leased European cars and Chloe's designer wardrobe than you do on payroll, I countered smoothly. Andre's face flushed a deep mottled red. His eyes widened with a terrifying mixture of embarrassment and rage. Watch your mouth. I am the eldest son in this family. I have carried the weight of Dad's expectations my entire life. I have represented this family in the community while you were hiding in your bedroom playing with computer code. I am the one who maintains our status. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from mine, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. I need $500,000, liquid, by Friday morning. Consider it the family tax. Consider it your entry fee for finally being taken seriously at our table. You owe this family, Maya. You owe me for everything I had to carry so you could run off and play entrepreneur. I did not step back. I held my ground, letting the heavy silence stretch just long enough to make his aggressive posturing feel incredibly awkward instead of intimidating. I looked at the veins popping in his neck, the desperate sweat gathering at his hairline, and the complete lack of actual business acumen in his eyes. The family tax. I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue with deliberate mocking slowness. That is a fascinating concept, Andre. Tell me, does the family tax cover the second mortgage you took out on your starter home to pay for Chloe's diamond tennis bracelet last year? Or does it just cover the payroll you missed for your last 3 employees because you needed to upgrade your exclusive country club membership to keep up appearances? Andre stepped back as if he had been physically struck. The color drained from his face, leaving an ashen, horrified expression. His jaw dropped. How do you know about the payroll? I run a financial technology company. I interrupted smoothly, my voice cold and precise. My entire industry is built on tracking data, analyzing liabilities, and identifying terrible investments. Do you honestly believe I would sell my company for $14 million and not run a basic background check on the people trying to bypass my security gates? Your consulting firm is not expanding, Andre. It is drowning in debt. You are a walking liability, and you came here hoping I would be dumb enough to throw my hard-earned equity into your sinking ship. DeAndre slammed his heavy fist onto the marble island, the sound cracking like a whip through the kitchen. You have no right to pry into your brother's personal finances. We are talking about respect. You are going to write that check, Maya. You are going to support your family the way you were raised to do. I am going to do no such thing, I said, my voice hardening into impenetrable steel. I am not a bank. I am not an ATM. And I am certainly not the financial bailout plan for a man who plays business instead of actually building one. You are getting absolutely nothing from me. Not a single dime, not a single cent. Now get out of my house. Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just sustained a mortal wound. You selfish, ungrateful girl, we raised you. We put clothes on your back. We fed you. We gave you the foundation to even stand in a house like this. You owe us your life. You did the bare minimum required by law to keep Child Protective Services away, I countered, looking my mother dead in the eye without a shred of hesitation. You did not nurture me. You barely tolerated me because I was not the golden son you could brag about at your social galas. And I am entirely done paying for your conditional affection. All 4 of you leave right now. Chloe finally spoke up, her voice shrill, breathless, and trembling with sheer entitlement. You cannot do this to us. Andre promised me we were getting the capital today. We already have contractors lined up for the new office space, and I already ordered the furniture for my studio setup. You are ruining our lives. Your husband ruined your lives, I corrected, not even bothering to look at her panic-stricken face. Take it up with him in couples therapy. Andre puffed out his chest again, planting his expensive leather shoes firmly on my imported hardwood floors. I am not going anywhere, he declared, his voice echoing loudly in the massive open concept space. I am the head of this family's future. You are going to sit down at this counter, write that transfer authorization, and show some proper respect to your elders. I will stand right here in this kitchen until you do. I did not raise my voice. I did not panic. I did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I simply reached over to the sleek integrated control panel seamlessly built into the edge of the marble island. I pressed a single discrete silver button. Within 15 seconds, the heavy synchronized footsteps of my on-site security detail echoed rapidly down the hallway. Two massive, impeccably dressed security professionals rounded the corner and stepped perfectly into the kitchen. They did not look like average guards. They looked like elite executive protection trained to handle high-threat corporate environments. They came to a halt right behind my father and brother, their sudden physical presence immediately sucking every ounce of remaining bravado right out of the room. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, gesturing toward my stunned relatives. "My guests were just leaving. They seem to have lost their way to the front door. Please escort them off the property immediately. If they resist or cause any damage, treat them as hostile trespassers and contact local law enforcement." The lead security guard, a towering man with a completely unreadable stone-cold expression, stepped directly up to Andre. "Sir, it is time to leave the premises." DeAndre tried to puff himself up to match the security guard's massive size, but the sheer physical reality of the situation rapidly deflated his patriarchal dominance. "You are having your own father thrown out by hired muscle." He sputtered, his voice losing its booming authoritative resonance and cracking with disbelief. "You stopped acting like a father the moment you decided I was just a walking checkbook for your favorite son," I replied coldly. "Escort them out." The guards moved in with practiced, undeniable efficiency. They did not grab anyone, but they used their imposing physical mass to expertly herd my family out of the kitchen through the grand living room and back out into the foyer. Andre protested the entire way, sputtering hollow threats and demanding they take their hands off him, even though the guards were merely walking closely behind him to force his retreat. Chloe trailed frantically after them, clutching her designer handbag tightly to her chest, her heels clicking wildly against the marble as she practically jogged to avoid the imposing security team. I followed them at a leisurely pace to the grand entryway, watching as the delivery men from earlier stood by their truck on the driveway, witnessing the entire spectacle of the so-called perfect prestigious family being driven out of the estate like common intruders. As they reached the threshold of the massive double doors, Valerie abruptly spun around, shaking off the guard's proximity. Her face was contorted with a vicious, venomous rage that completely stripped away every ounce of her polished upper-class matriarchal facade. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated malice. "You are dead to us!" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria, echoing sharply across the manicured front lawn for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Do you hear me? Maya, you are completely dead to this family. You think your little millions make you untouchable. I am calling the lawyers right now. You are officially cut out of your grandmother's historic brownstone inheritance. I will make sure you never see a single brick of that property. It is all going to Andre. Every last cent of our generational wealth belongs to your brother now. You are written out of our legacy." The threat was explicitly designed to be the ultimate punishment, the final devastating blow to bring me to my knees. That brownstone in the city was the absolute crown jewel of our family history. It was purchased by my grandmother during a time when Black women had to fight tooth and nail just to own a fraction of property. It was the symbol of everything our ancestors had overcome and everything we were supposed to build upon. Valerie expected me to crumble. She fully expected me to drop my pride, beg for forgiveness, and write the massive check just to keep my name attached to that sacred piece of our ancestry. I stood perfectly still in the doorway, letting the cool morning breeze sweep into the foyer. I looked past my screaming mother and locked eyes with Andre. He was wearing a triumphant, vindictive smirk, genuinely believing his mother had just secured his ultimate victory and delivered my ultimate devastating defeat. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel exceptionally small, and I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile that radiated absolute certainty. "Make sure you spell his name right on the legal paperwork, Mother," I said, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying perfectly through the quiet morning air. Before she could utter another toxic syllable, I grabbed the heavy brass handles of the massive oak double doors and slammed them shut directly in her face. The heavy, satisfying thud echoed through the grand foyer, leaving me in absolute beautiful silence. I locked the deadbolt, turned around, and walked back up my floating glass staircase. They thought they had just stripped me of my legacy and left me with nothing. They had absolutely no idea I was already 10 steps ahead of their destruction. The silence in my grand foyer lasted exactly 12 hours before the digital assault began. By 8 o'clock that evening, my smartphone was vibrating continuously against the marble kitchen island. I did not need to answer the calls to know what was happening. Andre was deploying his favorite weapon, his network. My brother had spent his entire adult life cultivating a meticulously crafted image within our city's affluent African-American social circle. He was the charismatic fraternity alumni president, the charming consultant who golfed at the right country clubs, and the golden son who attended every high-profile charity gala. I was just the quiet, obsessive coder who skipped Sunday brunches to build software. He knew exactly how to play the crowd. The text messages from family, friends, and distant relatives started rolling in, each one dripping with misplaced disappointment. One message from a prominent local judge, a man who regularly played poker with my father, read that he was praying for my soul after hearing how I abandoned my flesh and blood the second I got a taste of real money. Andre was spinning a masterful narrative. He was telling everyone who would listen that I had lost my mind, that the sudden wealth had turned me into a heartless monster who threw her own struggling parents and brother out onto the street without a second thought. But Andre's whisper campaign was just the opening act. The true devastation arrived the following morning, delivered by a woman who knew exactly how to weaponize her tears for maximum damage. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was not a misguided relative. It was David, the lead acquisition executive at the global banking consortium that had just purchased my fintech company for $14 million. Maya, we have a massive problem, David said, his voice tight with corporate panic. Have you seen the internet this morning? You are trending, and it is not because of our acquisition. I opened my laptop, pulling up the primary social media platforms. There it was, plastered across the top of my feed, a video with over 2 million views and climbing rapidly. It was Chloe. She was sitting in the driver's seat of her leased Mercedes, parked in what looked like a random, dimly lit parking lot. She wore no makeup, her blonde hair intentionally messy, completely abandoning her usual polished lifestyle influencer aesthetic. She was staring into the camera with wide, terrified eyes, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I just need to speak my truth, Chloe whimpered in the video, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed fragility. I have always tried to be a good sister-in-law. I have always tried to embrace Maya and support her business, but last night my husband and I went to congratulate her on her success, and she completely snapped. Chloe paused, wiping a tear away with the sleeve of her oversized sweater, playing the victim role with terrifying precision. She was so angry, Chloe continued, her voice breaking into a sob. She was so aggressive and hostile. We just wanted to celebrate as a family, but she cornered me. She had these massive, intimidating security guards physically force us out of the house. And the things she said to me. The things she said about me not belonging in a black family, about how my kind of people just want to steal her money. I have never felt so unsafe in my entire life. I am literally shaking right now. I watched the video in absolute cold horror. Chloe had not just lied. She had explicitly chosen words designed to trigger the most dangerous, deep-seated racial stereotypes imaginable. She labeled me as the angry, aggressive, hostile black woman, positioning herself as the delicate, terrified white victim who had barely escaped my unprovoked wrath. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the internet would eagerly swallow that narrative whole. The comments beneath the video were a toxic wasteland of digital fury. Thousands of strangers were calling for my immediate cancellation. They were demanding that my company be boycotted. They were tagging the banking consortium, demanding they reverse the $14 million acquisition and cut all ties with a supposedly violent racist founder. Maya, are you still there? David asked through the phone, the anxiety in his voice escalating. Our public relations department is having a collective heart attack. The board is terrified of this kind of social noise right after a major acquisition. This looks terrible for the brand. We need to shut this down immediately before it hits the mainstream news cycles. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, despite the digital firestorm raging across the internet. What exactly is your public relations department suggesting, David? You need to issue an apology, he replied quickly, leaning into the standard corporate playbook. Acknowledge that emotions ran high. Say it was a family misunderstanding. And frankly, Maya, if they are looking for a payout, just give it to them. Pay them whatever they are asking for, and make them sign a non-disclosure agreement. Give them a few $100,000 to post an update saying you reconciled. It is a small price to pay to protect a $14 million deal. Just cave, Maya. Make it go away. As David practically begged me to surrender, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from DeAndre. I read the message, my eyes narrowing at the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the extortion playing out in real time. The text read, "We saw Chloe's video. It is a shame the internet is so quick to judge. The investors must be losing their minds. Send the $500,000 to Andre's business account by noon today. If the money clears, Chloe will post a new video saying she overreacted and that it was all a big misunderstanding. Your choice, Maya. Protect your little empire or lose everything." They had orchestrated a modern-day digital lynching to hold my reputation hostage. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had actively encouraged their daughter-in-law to weaponize her race and her tears to extort me for $500,000. They believed they had completely trapped me. They thought the corporate pressure would crush my spirit and force me to write the check just to survive the public relations nightmare. "David," I said, leaning back in my leather office chair, my voice radiating an absolute chilling calm. "Let me make something abundantly clear to you and to the board. Please tell me you are going to post the apology," David pleaded. "I do not negotiate with terrorists," I stated firmly, closing out the social media tab on my browser. "And I absolutely do not pay ransoms to mediocre relatives throwing temper tantrums on the internet." "But Maya, the stock implications, the optics," David stammered. "The optics are about to change," I interrupted, shutting him down completely. "The acquisition paperwork is signed. The funds have cleared my accounts. I am legally protected, and so is the consortium. Tell your public relations team to take the day off. I am going to handle this my way, and I promise you by tomorrow morning nobody will be talking about me being aggressive. They will be talking about how my sister-in-law committed career suicide." I hung up the phone before David could formulate another panicked argument. I did not waste a single second drafting a defensive notes app apology. I did not record a tearful response video trying to explain my side of the story to a million strangers who had already made up their minds. Engaging in a public shouting match was exactly what Andre and Chloe wanted. It would only feed the algorithm and validate their extortion attempt. Instead, I picked up my phone and made two highly specific phone calls. The first call was to a private intelligence firm, known for operating with absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. I needed them to dig into every single digital footprint, bank statement, and corporate filing associated with my brother's life. The second call was to the most feared high-powered defamation litigation team in the city. I instructed them to draft a lawsuit so financially devastating it would make Chloe's ancestors feel the impact. They thought they could use the court of public opinion to steal my wealth. I was going to use the actual court of law to permanently dismantle theirs. My legal team did not deal in apologies or public relations spin. They dealt in absolute financial annihilation. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting across the polished mahogany table from Harrison, the most ruthless defamation attorney in the state. I slid my phone across his desk, displaying the extortion text DeAndre had sent me that morning. Harrison read the message, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked at me and simply asked how much of their lives I wanted to dismantle. I told him I wanted everything. We spent the next 3 hours drafting a lawsuit that would make the devil himself sweat. We hit Chloe with defamation, per se intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with a corporate contract. Because Chloe had specifically targeted my business acquisition and incited a digital mob to harass my investors, the damages were not capped at hurt feelings. We were suing her for a baseline of $5 million. Furthermore, because DeAndre was foolish enough to put a monetary ransom in writing, we added a civil extortion claim. Harrison immediately filed an emergency motion to freeze Andre's business accounts, pending an investigation into the blackmail attempt. My family thought they were playing a game of social media chess. They had no idea I was bringing a financial wrecking ball to the board. While Harrison finalized the paperwork, my private investigator was already tracking Chloe's movements. She was not hiding at home nursing her supposedly shattered nerves. She was not recovering from the terrifying trauma she had so violently wept about on the internet just hours prior. She was exactly where she always was on a Sunday morning. She was holding court at the Whispering Pines Country Club. It was an ultra-exclusive, overwhelmingly white establishment where Chloe spent her weekends sipping mimosas and pretending she was born into generational wealth instead of marrying into a family she was actively trying to destroy. It was her safe haven, a place where she curated her pristine lifestyle influencer image, surrounded by women who shared her exact brand of entitlement. I did not send a standard process server. A random stranger handing her a manila envelope would not send the right message. I needed Chloe to look me in the eye. I needed her to understand that her digital lynch mob had failed and that the consequences of her actions were going to be delivered personally. I wore a tailored crimson suit that commanded immediate attention, paired with the kind of quiet, impenetrable confidence that simply cannot be manufactured. When my chauffeured car pulled up to the valet stand, the staff scrambled to open my door. I walked past the mahogany reception desk with such absolute authority that the concierge did not even attempt to ask for my membership card. I moved through the plush carpeted hallways of the clubhouse, tracking the sound of clinking silverware and light jazz until I reached the sprawling outdoor terrace. I found her almost immediately. Chloe was sitting at a large shaded circular table surrounded by 6 women who looked like variations of the same country club stereotype. She was right in the middle of a grand performance. I watched from a distance as she dabbed the corners of her eyes with a crisp linen napkin, playing the traumatized victim for an audience hanging onto her every fabricated word. I could hear her fake trembling voice floating over the gentle breeze. She was recounting the horrific tale of her aggressive sister-in-law, soaking up the sympathy and outrage of her wealthy friends. I did not announce myself. I did not storm over and start yelling. I simply walked up to her table with measured, deliberate steps and stood directly behind her chair. One of her friends, a woman dripping in heavy tennis bracelets, noticed me first. Her eyes widened in alarm, and her sympathetic murmurs ground to a sudden, awkward halt. Chloe noticed her friend staring and turned around in her seat. The fake tears dried up instantly. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her jaw dropped slightly, but no sound came out. She was entirely stripped of the bravery she possessed when hiding behind a smartphone screen. I smiled. It was a chilling, perfectly composed expression. I dropped the heavy 2-inch thick legal folder directly onto her plate of avocado toast. The loud thud made the entire table physically jump in their seats. "Good morning, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet, sunlit terrace. "I hope the mimosas are cold. I am here to formally serve you with a civil lawsuit for defamation, tortious interference, and extortion." Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. She stared down at the thick legal document resting on her ruined brunch. Her friends were completely paralyzed, their eyes darting frantically between my calm, collected face and Chloe's panic-stricken expression. "You cannot do this!" Chloe finally managed to whisper, her manicured hands shaking violently as she stared at the folder. "You have to back down. Everyone on the internet hates you. You are ruined." I leaned in slightly, resting my hands casually on the back of her chair. "The internet is not a courtroom, Chloe. You posted a fabricated video accusing me of a hate crime to sabotage, and your father-in-law was stupid enough to put a $500,000 ransom demand in writing from his personal cell phone." The women at the table gasped audibly. The word extortion hung in the crisp morning air like a guillotine. Chloe's carefully constructed image as the innocent, distressed victim shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her most important social circle. Her friends were no longer looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with shocked disgust and the sudden realization that they were associating with a criminal liability. She was not a victim anymore. She was a massive, humiliating scandal waiting to happen. "We are suing you for $5 million in damages," I stated, ensuring my voice carried to the neighboring tables, where other affluent country club members had stopped eating to watch the spectacle unfold. "And since we have submitted the extortion evidence to a federal judge this morning, your husband's business accounts have been officially frozen, pending a criminal investigation." Chloe let out a choked, breathless gasp, pressing her hands against her face as the reality of her impending financial ruin crashed down on her. The pristine, wealthy lifestyle she had fought so hard to project was evaporating in real time. "You have 21 days to file a legal response," I said, straightening my posture and smoothing the front of my crimson jacket. "I highly suggest you spend less time crying on camera and more time finding an attorney who accepts payment plans. Enjoy your brunch." I turned and walked away, leaving the terrace in absolute stunned silence. I did not look back, but I could hear the immediate frantic whispering erupt from her table as her friends demanded to know what she had done. Chloe was effectively excommunicated from her own sanctuary. She had tried to turn the world against me using lies, but I had just used the truth to isolate her completely. As I walked back through the clubhouse lobby, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I was no longer the scapegoat they could bully into submission. I had drawn a line in the sand with a financial bulldozer. But my retaliation was not quite finished. I had secured my reputation and neutralized Chloe's digital attack, but there was still the matter of my brother and my parents. They thought they could hold my legacy hostage. They thought they could threaten me with the loss of my grandmother's historic property. When I slid into the back seat of my chauffeured car, my phone buzzed with an incoming secure file from my private investigator. He had been digging into Andre's financial history while Harrison drafted the lawsuit. I opened the encrypted document and began reading through the summary report. What I found inside those pages was a revelation so massive, so profoundly catastrophic, that it completely altered the trajectory of my retaliation. My family had been lying to each other for years, and the truth was about to hand me the keys to their complete and utter destruction. The drive back to my corporate headquarters offered a brief window of silence, but my mind was operating at maximum capacity. I had just detonated a financial bomb in the middle of Chloe's carefully curated social sanctuary, but the war was far from over. Defamation and extortion were simply the surface-level symptoms of a much deeper disease infecting my family. By the time I stepped out of my car and walked into the sleek glass-enclosed lobby of my fintech office, I was ready to diagnose the root cause. My private investigator, a former corporate fraud detective named Jackson, was already waiting for me in my executive suite. Jackson did not deal in gossip or social media theatrics. He dealt in hard data forensic accounting and paper trails that people desperately tried to hide. As I closed my heavy frosted glass door, shutting out the hum of my engineering team outside, I noticed his expression was unusually grim. I was standing by my conference table, and resting directly in the center of the polished wood was a massive, overstuffed manila folder. I took off my crimson jacket, draped it over the back of my leather chair, and poured myself a glass of water. "I assume by the size of that file you found more than just a few maxed-out credit cards and unpaid country club dues," I said, taking a seat across from him. Jackson did not smile. He pushed the heavy folder across the table toward me. "You hired me to look into your brother's consulting firm, to build a defense against the extortion attempt." He began, his voice perfectly level. "I followed the money, Maya. Or rather, I followed the lack of it. Andre has been running a shell game for the better part of 5 years. His firm has generated zero actual revenue in the last 18 months. He has been funding his and Chloe's entire lifestyle through high-interest business loans, merchant cash advances, and moving debt from one ledger to another." I nodded, opening the folder and scanning the top sheet. "I suspected as much. You do not demand a $500,000 family tax if your business is actually scaling. He is drowning, and he needed my exit capital to plug the holes in his sinking ship." Jackson tapped a specific tab on the side of the folder. "Keep reading. The business debt is bad. but it is not the reason he was desperate enough to put an extortion threat in writing. People who are just bankrupt file for Chapter 11 and move on. People who are facing the absolute destruction of their entire family legacy do reckless, stupid things. Look at Section 4. I flipped the heavy stack of papers over to the designated section. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, the bank letterheads, and the official county property records. I read the address listed on the primary document. My breath hitched in my throat, my heart, which had remained perfectly steady while I faced down a mob of angry relatives and a viral smear campaign, suddenly skipped a beat. "This is my grandmother's house," I whispered, staring at the historic brownstone address printed in harsh black ink. Jackson nodded slowly. "Your father legally transferred the administration of the deed to Andre 4 years ago." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. DeAndre had proudly announced the transfer during a Thanksgiving dinner. He had stood at the head of the table booming about how a family's legacy must be secured by the male heir. He claimed Andre, with his supposed business acumen, was the rightful steward of our ancestry. My grandmother had worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, fighting through redlining and vicious racial discrimination just to secure that brownstone. It was a historic property in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. It was the physical manifestation of Black excellence and resilience in our bloodline. It was our anchor. And DeAndre had handed the keys to Andre simply because of his gender, completely ignoring the fact that I was already building a financial technology empire. I looked closer at the dates on the bank documents. Andre did not just hold the deed, I said, the cold reality settling over my skin. He leveraged it. I took out a massive second mortgage against the equity of the brownstone. 3 years ago, Jackson confirmed, tracing the financial timeline with his pen. He used the house as collateral to secure a commercial line of credit. He took out $1.2 million Maya. And based on his expenditure reports, he did not invest a single dime of it into his consulting firm. He used your grandmother's legacy to pay for Chloe's luxury cars, their international vacations, and the designer wardrobe she loves showing off online. He literally liquidated your family's history to buy fake prestige. A profound, sickening wave of disgust washed over me. Andre had mortgaged the very floorboards our grandmother scrubbed on her hands and knees just to keep his entitled wife draped in diamonds. But that is not the bombshell. Jackson continued, his voice dropping into a serious, urgent register. Look at the most recent document from the lender. I flipped to the last page in the section. It was a formal notice of default stamped by the county clerk. Attached to it was a notice of sale. I read the bold red print at the bottom of the page, my eyes widening as the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together. The balloon payments hit 6 months ago, Jackson explained. Andre defaulted. He has been dodging the bank, filing frivolous extensions and praying for a miracle. The bank ran out of patience. They are officially foreclosing on the property. The brownstone is scheduled to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps. When I demanded, my voice sharp and demanding. This Friday, Jackson replied, at exactly noon. I leaned back in my chair, the magnitude of my brother's deception finally becoming entirely clear. The puzzle was complete. The random, aggressive ambush at my estate yesterday morning, the sudden, desperate demand for $500,000, the attempt to destroy my reputation when I refused. I was not asking for seed money, I murmured, staring at the foreclosure notice. He needed exactly $500,000 to cure the default and stop the auction. He was trying to use my acquisition money to cover up his ultimate betrayal before DeAndre and Valerie found out what he had done. Does your father know? Jackson asked. Does he know the golden son bankrupted the family crown jewel? I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. DeAndre and Valerie have absolutely no idea. If my father knew Andre had lost the brownstone, he would have dragged him out into the street himself. My parents still believe Andre is a financial genius. They believe he is managing the estate perfectly. Andre is terrified. He orchestrated this entire digital smear campaign to force my hand, because if Friday rolls around and that house goes to the bank, his life as the perfect son is over. Jackson leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. The holding company managing the distressed debt is a private commercial lender. They are aggressive, but they are driven strictly by profit. They do not want the hassle of an auction if they can avoid it. But by Friday morning, the property will be gone. What do you want to do? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I could see the sprawling city skyline, the very city my grandmother had fought to claim a tiny piece of. She had endured unimaginable hardships so that her children and grandchildren would never have to bow their heads to anyone. And her eldest grandson had thrown it all away for a leased Mercedes and a country club membership. My parents had stood in my foyer yesterday and threatened to disown me. They had screamed that they were writing me out of the legacy, officially declaring that the brownstone would belong entirely to Andre. They had used our family's history as a weapon to punish me for achieving success without their permission. They thought they were holding the ultimate leverage over my head. They thought they possessed a kingdom they could banish me from. They were proudly guarding a castle that was already burning to the ground. I looked back down at the bank documents, noting the specific name of the commercial lender holding the paper. I had $14 million in liquid capital sitting securely in my private accounts. I had a top-tier legal team currently finalizing the destruction of Chloe's social standing. And now I had the exact blueprint of my brother's impending doom. Jackson, I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of panic, but vibrating with absolute calculating purpose. I want you to pull every single contact number, routing protocol, and executive profile for this commercial lender. Get me the name of the senior debt portfolio manager handling this specific foreclosure. Jackson raised an eyebrow. You are going to pay off your brother's debt. You are going to bail him out. I picked up the manila folder and closed it with a definitive, satisfying snap. I am not bailing anyone out, I replied, standing up from the table and smoothing my crimson suit. My family made it very clear that they only respect transactions. They only respect power. They tried to use my grandmother's legacy to break my spirit. So I am not going to pay the debt, Jackson. I am going to buy it. Jackson stared at me across the polished mahogany of my conference table, processing the absolute magnitude of what I had just commanded. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not offer unsolicited advice about family forgiveness. He simply opened his encrypted tablet, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard, to trace the exact corporate structure of the commercial lender, holding my grandmother's legacy hostage. Within 45 minutes, I was stepping out of the private elevator onto the 50th floor of a steel and glass high-rise in the financial district. I did not come alone. I brought Harrison, my lead defamation attorney, and my newly appointed chief financial officer. We bypassed the standard reception area and walked directly into the executive suites of Apex Commercial Lending. This was the aggressive, profit-driven firm that had eagerly handed my brother $1.2 million, knowing full well he lacked the business acumen to pay it back. They had predatory lending down to a science, relying on the historic value of the brownstone to secure their reckless investment. As we were ushered into a sterile, aggressively air-conditioned boardroom, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my crimson suit jacket. I pulled it out, finding a new notification from the family group chat. It was a message from Valerie. She had attached a photo of a massive, heavily embossed catering menu. The text beneath the photo read, "Your brother is working day and night to finish the surprise renovations on your grandmother's brownstone for our 40th anniversary gala this weekend. It is an absolute shame that your bitter jealousy keeps you from participating in our family milestones, Maya. We are moving forward without you." I stared at the screen, a cold, sharp realization settling over my features. My parents had absolutely no idea. They were blissfully, arrogantly oblivious to the fact that their golden child had completely bankrupted their generational wealth. Andre had clearly lied to them, claiming the presence of bank inspectors and property appraisers over the last few months were just high-end contractors preparing the house for a spectacular anniversary remodel. I was using their 40th anniversary gala as a smokescreen to hide the devastating reality that the property was scheduled to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps the very next morning. I was letting our parents plan the biggest celebration of their lives inside a burning building. I locked my phone screen and slid it back into my pocket just as the senior portfolio manager walked into the boardroom. He introduced himself as Sterling, a man whose expensive watch and condescending smile perfectly matched the predatory nature of his firm. He sat across from me, glancing briefly at Harrison and my financial officer, before folding his hands on the table. Miss, I understand you are a relative of the debtor. Sterling began utilizing a patronizing tone designed to intimidate panicked family members. I deeply sympathize with your situation, but the balloon payment on this commercial line of credit is severely past due. The notice of default has been fully executed. Unless you are here to drop a certified cashier's check for $1.4 million to cure the default and cover our extensive legal penalties. The auction proceeds tomorrow at noon. We do not grant emotional extensions. I did not break eye contact. I did not blink. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the cool glass of the boardroom table. I am not here to beg for an extension, Mr. Sterling. I stated, my voice radiating an icy, impenetrable authority. And I am certainly not here to cure my brother's default, so your firm can continue collecting predatory interest rates on my family's historic property. Sterling frowned, his condescending smile faltering. Then why exactly are you wasting my time? I am here to purchase the distressed asset, I replied smoothly. I am buying the non-performing loan in its entirety. I want the original promissory note, the commercial mortgage, and the absolute assignment of the deed of trust transferred to my holding company right now. Sterling let out a short, dismissive laugh, leaning back in his chair. We do not typically sell individual distressed assets to retail buyers, miss. We package them for institutional investors. Furthermore, acquiring this specific debt requires immediate verified liquidity. You cannot finance a buyout of a foreclosed commercial loan with a standard residential mortgage. My chief financial officer did not wait for my cue. He simply opened his leather portfolio and slid a single verified bank statement across the glass table directly into Sterling's hands. Sterling picked up the document. His eyes scanned the top line, dropped to the verified balance, and physically widened. The color rapidly drained from his face as he stared at the $14 million in liquid, unencumbered capital sitting securely in my primary wealth management account. $14 million in cash hits drastically different when you are a mid-level portfolio manager trying to offload a $1.4 million bad debt. The dismissive arrogance completely evaporated from the room. Sterling swallowed hard, carefully placing the document back onto the table as if it were highly combustible. You want to assume the position of the primary creditor. Sterling clarified, his tone suddenly laced with deep, undeniable professional respect. You want to buy the debt outright. I want to be the bank. I corrected him, my voice devoid of any hesitation. You want liquidity. You want this problematic foreclosure off your books before the weekend, so you can report a clean ledger to your partners. I am offering you an immediate, frictionless exit. Draft the assignment of mortgage and prepare the endorsement of the note. My team is ready to wire the funds the second the ink dries. The next 45 minutes were a masterclass in ruthless corporate efficiency. Sterling summoned his internal legal counsel, and the boardroom transformed into a rapid-fire exchange of contracts, wire transfer protocols, and title assignments. Harrison meticulously reviewed every single clause, ensuring that my holding company was granted absolute uncontested rights to the debt and the underlying collateral. Andre had used our grandmother's legacy to fund Chloe's designer bags and his string of failed business ventures. He had treated the blood, sweat, and undeniable resilience of our ancestors like a personal slush fund. He thought he could outrun the consequences by hiding behind our parents' blind favoritism. But as I signed my name on the final line of the assignment contract, legally transferring the debt from Apex Commercial Lending to my own corporate entity, the game fundamentally changed. The wire transfer cleared within minutes. Sterling stood up, offering his hand with a level of deference he had entirely lacked when I first walked into the room. It has been a pleasure doing business with you, he said, handing me the heavy official legal folder containing the original deed of trust. I did not shake his hand. I simply took the folder, the physical weight of my grandmother's legacy resting securely in my grasp. As we rode the elevator back down to the ground floor, Harrison looked over at me, a sharp, calculating gleam in his eye. You understand the power you hold now, Maya. The moment this is filed with the county clerk, you are legally his creditor. You hold the note. You control the foreclosure timeline. You can have the sheriff physically evict your brother and lock the doors to that brownstone by tomorrow morning. I looked down at the embossed legal folder in my hands. The thought of sending armed deputies to drag Andre out of the house he had financially violated was incredibly tempting. It would be swift, brutal, and entirely justified. But it would also allow DeAndre and Valerie to continue playing the victims. They would spin the narrative claiming I used my wealth to bully my brother out of spite. They would never actually see the depth of Andre's failure, because they would be too busy blaming me for the consequences. I am not going to evict him tomorrow, I told Harrison as the elevator doors chimed and opened into the grand lobby. My parents are hosting their 40th anniversary gala at the brownstone this weekend. Andre told them he is renovating the property to prepare for the party. He is planning to stand in front of our entire social circle and accept their praise while hiding the fact that the bank was supposed to take the house on Friday. Harrison raised an eyebrow, stepping out into the bustling financial district street. So we paused the foreclosure. We let him have the party. We do not just let him have the party, I replied, sliding into the back of my waiting town car and tapping the heavy folder against my knee. We are going to let my father stand on a stage and hand Andre the ceremonial keys to our family legacy. We are going to let them build their arrogant patriarchal pedestal as high as it can possibly go. Because the higher they climb, the more devastating it will be when I pull the foundation completely out from under them. The heavy silk of the emerald green evening gown cascaded down my body as I stood on the circular pedestal of the exclusive downtown boutique. The floor-to-ceiling mirrors reflected a woman who had just checkmated her entire family. But my expression remained completely stoic. Aunt Vivian sat on a tufted velvet sofa behind me, swirling a crystal glass of complimentary champagne. We were supposed to be finalizing my alterations for the upcoming weekend, but the fitting room had quickly transformed into a war room. Valerie is completely out of her mind, Vivian announced, taking a delicate sip of her drink and setting the glass down on a mirrored side table. I just got off the phone with the event planner she hired. Your mother has commissioned a 10-piece brass band, 2 towering swan ice sculptures, and a 5-course plated dinner for 250 guests. She is treating this 40th anniversary gala like it is a royal coronation. I kept my eyes locked on my own reflection as the seamstress pinned the hem of my dress. And who is paying for the swans? I asked smoothly. Because Andre certainly does not have the liquidity. Vivian let out a sharp, cynical laugh that echoed off the boutique walls. That is the grand joke of the century. Valerie thinks Andre is pouring all his capital into this massive secret renovation of your grandmother's brownstone. He told them he is stripping the floors, upgrading the molding, and installing a commercial kitchen just in time for the party. So your mother happily maxed out 2 of her high-yield credit cards to cover the caterers and the band. She thinks Andre is handling the venue costs and giving them a fully remodeled historic estate as their anniversary gift. The absolute audacity of my brother was almost impressive. There were no renovations. There were no contractors stripping the hardwood floors or installing imported marble. Andre had simply slapped some cheap scaffolding up against the front of the brownstone and locked the doors to keep our parents from dropping by unannounced. He had manufactured a fake construction site to hide the fact that the bank had been sending appraisers and foreclosure agents to inspect the property. I was letting our parents plunge themselves into high-interest consumer debt to throw a party inside a house he had already lost to a commercial lender. DeAndre has been bragging to anyone who will listen at the country club. Vivian continued adjusting the silk scarf draped over her shoulders. He is telling all the elders in the community that his son is a real estate visionary. He actually told the pastor last Sunday that giving Andre control of the family legacy was the smartest financial move he ever made. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. The seamstress stepped away to grab another box of pins, leaving Vivian and me alone in the quiet privacy of the fitting room. I turned away from the mirror and looked directly at my aunt. How did he actually get his name on that deed, Vivian? I asked, my voice dropping into a quiet, dangerous register. I was 25 when Grandma passed. I was already working 80-hour weeks building the initial framework for my software. I never understood how Dad managed to bypass the probate court entirely and secure the property exclusively for Andre. Vivian's expression hardened. The sophisticated, breezy aunt persona vanished, replaced by the fierce, protective matriarch who had watched my father operate his patriarchal dictatorship for decades. She stood up from the velvet sofa and walked over to the pedestal, her eyes blazing with a suppressed historical anger. He did not bypass probate, Maya Vivian said, her voice tight with disgust. He bypassed your grandmother. She reached out and gently smoothed a wrinkle from the emerald silk of my dress. I was in the hospital room 3 weeks before she died. The medication was heavy. She was exhausted, drifting in and out of sleep. Your father brought a notary public and a stack of legal documents directly to her bedside. I told him to wait to let her rest, but DeAndre has always believed his timing is the only timing that matters. My hands curled into tight fists at my sides. He made her sign the house over while she was medicated. He held the pen in her hand. Vivian confirmed her tone, laced with absolute venom. I tried to intervene. I asked him why your name was not on the transfer documents alongside Andre's. Do you know what your father told me right there in the intensive care unit? He looked me dead in the eye and said that placing a piece of premium real estate in a young woman's name just invites future husbands to steal it. He said the men of the house are the natural protectors of generational wealth. He claimed Andre would safeguard the brownstone to ensure it remained the anchor of the family. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the fitting room. My grandmother had spent 35 years working grueling double shifts as a registered nurse. She had scrubbed floors, sacrificed meals, and endured the vicious racial discrimination of the 1970s housing market just to secure that brownstone. It was a monument to Black female resilience. It was the physical embodiment of a woman's refusal to be broken by a system designed to keep her out. And my father had snatched it from her weakened hands, erasing her matriarchal triumph to feed his own patriarchal delusion. He had stripped me of my rightful inheritance, assuming my gender, made me a financial liability, only to hand the crown jewel of our ancestry to a son who liquidated it to buy luxury cars and designer handbags for his entitled wife. DeAndre had handed the keys to the thief because the thief looked like him. I looked back at the mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer just a betrayed daughter or a frustrated sister. She was a deeply calculated financial predator who had just acquired the ultimate leverage. I felt the heavy, lost legal folder resting inside my designer tote bag sitting on the nearby chair. The assignment of the commercial mortgage. The absolute control of the foreclosure. Are you going to the gala? Vivian asked softly, breaking the heavy tension in the room. I saw the invitation Valerie mailed you. It was disgusting. Telling you to bring a check and publicly apologize, just to be allowed back into their presence. You do not have to subject yourself to that environment, Maya. You have your 14 million. You have your peace. You can just walk away and let them drown in their own mess. I turned back to my aunt, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth. I am absolutely going to the gala, Aunt Vivian. Vivian raised an eyebrow, sensing the dangerous shift in my demeanor. Why would you give them the satisfaction of showing up? Because DeAndre is planning a grand ceremony. I explained, stepping down from the pedestal as the seamstress returned to the room. He is going to stand on a stage in front of 250 of their closest friends, colleagues, and community leaders. He is going to deliver a speech about legacy. He is going to present Andre with a ceremonial set of keys to the brownstone to celebrate the completion of these fake renovations. He is going to crown his golden boy in front of the entire city. Vivian crossed her arms, her sharp mind quickly processing my tone. And what exactly are you going to do while your father plays kingmaker? I walked over to my tote bag, letting my hand brush against the leather exterior that concealed the bank documents. I am going to let him put the crown perfectly on Andre's head, I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. I am going to let my parents build their arrogant patriarchal pedestal as high as it can possibly go. Because when you destroy an illusion, Vivian, you do not do it in private. You do it under the brightest lights available. I picked up my bag and looked at my aunt. I bought a dress today, but on Saturday night I am bringing a demolition crew. I walked through the double doors of my estate, the heavy garment bag containing my emerald silk gown draped securely over my arm. The cool, quiet air of my home was a welcome contrast to the heavy revelations dropped at the boutique. I handed the dress to my housekeeper and walked toward the marble console table in the foyer, where my daily mail was neatly sorted. Sitting perfectly centered on top of the stack was an oversized envelope made of heavy cream-colored cardstock. It was sealed with a ridiculous custom-pressed gold wax stamp bearing our family initial. I picked it up, feeling the expensive weight of it. Valerie had clearly spared absolutely no expense. I slid my fingernail under the flap and pulled out an invitation so unnecessarily gaudy it could have easily passed as a royal wedding announcement. The elegant, swirling calligraphy declared that Valerie and DeAndre joyfully requested the honor of my presence at their Ruby Jubilee, celebrating 40 years of marital success and family legacy. I traced my finger down to the bottom of the card, where the venue was proudly listed in bold gold foil. The historic brownstone. A small scented piece of matching stationery fluttered out from behind the invitation and landed face up on the marble floor. I bent down and picked it up. Valerie's distinctive looping cursive stared back at me. I read the words twice just to let the pure, unadulterated delusion wash over me completely. Maya, despite your disgraceful behavior and your aggressive outbursts, your father and I are willing to be the bigger people. We know you are lashing out because you feel inadequate compared to your brother. Come to the gala this Saturday. Apologize publicly to the family for the scene you caused. Bring a cashier's check for your brother's business, and we might consider letting you back into our circle. Do not squander this final act of grace. I let out a sharp, cold laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of my entryway. The sheer audacity was practically suffocating. My mother had just orchestrated a viral racist digital smear campaign against me with her daughter-in-law. She had stood in this exact foyer and screamed that I was dead to her. And now she was staging a fake hostage negotiation where she held absolutely zero hostages. She honestly believed that the threat of social exile from their pretentious country club friends would break me. She thought I was still that 22-year-old girl desperate for a seat at her table, terrified of losing the approval of the community elders. She thought the fear of being ostracized would force me to write a $500,000 check to save my own reputation. It was textbook manipulation, a classic narcissist maneuver designed to isolate the target and force compliance through public shaming. I did not rip the note up. I did not crumble it in a fit of emotional rage. I walked straight into my home office, the click of my heels rhythmic and purposeful against the hardwood floor. I approached the biometric safe built into the custom cabinetry behind my desk, pressed my thumb to the scanner, and pulled the heavy steel door open. I reached inside and pulled out the thick legal folder I had acquired directly from Apex Commercial Lending. I walked over to my large mahogany desk and spread the documents out across the smooth surface. The contrast between the two sets of papers was beautifully poetic. On my left sat Valerie's gold-embossed, heavily perfumed fantasy. On my right sat the cold, hard, undisputed reality. I looked down at the original promissory note bearing Andre's signature. I traced my finger over the absolute assignment of the deed of trust. I stared at the final notice of default, the document that proved my brother had completely bankrupted the very legacy my father was preparing to celebrate. And right beneath it was the brand new expedited deed filed seamlessly with the county clerk. It listed my corporate holding company as the sole uncontested legal owner of the property. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the desk. Andre was probably at the brownstone right this second, sweating through his tailored shirt, desperately paying off cheap caterers with maxed-out credit cards. He was praying the bank would not send a sheriff to change the locks before Saturday night. He was stringing our parents along, letting my mother plunge herself into massive consumer debt to throw a luxury party inside a building he no longer owned. He was playing a dangerous, pathetic game of roulette, hoping against hope that he could secure my money before the foreclosure auction destroyed his life. He did not know the auction was already canceled. He did not know the bank was no longer his primary creditor. He did not know that his little sister had bought the board he was trying to play on. The fact that DeAndre had stood in a hospital room and forced my dying grandmother to sign that house over to Andre, simply because he was a man, fueled a quiet, steady inferno in my chest. They had erased her matriarchal triumph to feed a patriarchal delusion. They had stripped me of my rightful inheritance, assuming my gender made me a financial liability. They had handed the crown jewel of our ancestry to a son who immediately liquidated it to buy designer handbags and fake prestige. DeAndre wanted to hand Andre the ceremonial keys to the family legacy on a grand stage. He wanted to cement his golden boy's status in front of the entire city. I was going to let him do exactly that. I walked over to the leather armchair in the corner of my office where I had set down my accessories for the upcoming weekend. I picked up a structured black designer clutch. It was sleek sharp and meant for a woman walking into a boardroom ready to execute a hostile takeover, not a woman attending a polite family dinner. I walked back to the desk. I picked up Valerie's handwritten condescending note and dropped it directly into the paper shredder, listening to the satisfying mechanical grind as her final act of grace was reduced to confetti. Then I carefully gathered the foreclosure notice, the default execution, and the newly certified deed transfer. I folded the heavy legal papers with precise, deliberate movements. I smiled, a calm, deeply satisfied expression settling over my features as I slid the financial destruction of my family's golden child perfectly inside my designer clutch. I snapped the gold clasp shut, the metallic click sealing their fate. I will bring a document, all right. The amber uplighting cast a warm, expensive glow across the historic limestone facade of my grandmother's brownstone. But to my eyes, it was nothing more than a highly illuminated crime scene. As my chauffeured car pulled smoothly up to the curb, the heavy bass of a live 10-piece jazz band spilled out onto the bustling city street. Valets in crisp uniforms were sprinting back and forth, frantically managing the relentless arrival of luxury vehicles. My mother had clearly spared absolutely no expense, plunging herself into catastrophic consumer debt to fund a lie. The front of the property was completely obscured by massive, heavy black draping strung over commercial scaffolding. It was a cheap, desperate theatrical trick orchestrated by Andre to hide the fact that the bank had been sending asset inspectors to the property all week. I stepped out of the car, the heavy emerald silk of my custom gown moving like liquid around my ankles. The flash of a local society photographer's camera immediately caught my arrival, illuminating the cold, predatory determination settled perfectly across my features. I looked toward the top of the grand sweeping staircase leading to the main entrance. Andre was standing there playing the role of the benevolent, successful host. He wore a custom tuxedo greeting the city's black elite with that same practiced, charismatic smile that had shielded his incompetence for 36 years. Then his eyes locked onto me at the bottom of the stairs. The transformation was instantaneous. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving an ashen, horrified mask of pure panic. I knew I had purchased his debt. He knew I held the deed. But he had gambled his entire existence on the desperate hope that the social pressure of this gala would keep me away. Andre frantically waved his hand, signaling two massive, heavily armed private security guards stationed near the doorway. He leaned in, whispering aggressively into the ear of the head guard, while pointing a shaking finger directly at me. The two men immediately descended the staircase, their physical bulk designed to intimidate anyone foolish enough to cause a scene. They stepped seamlessly into my path, effectively blocking my access to my own ancestral home. "Ma'am," the head guard stated, his voice a low, rumbling threat meant to frighten me into submission. "You are not on the approved guest list for this evening's private event. I am going to have to ask you to step back into your vehicle and depart the premises immediately." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or engage in a loud, embarrassing argument on the sidewalk. I simply reached into my structured designer clutch, my fingers bypassing my lipstick to grasp the heavy, legally binding documents folded perfectly inside. I pulled out a single embossed sheet of paper, with the county clerk's unmistakable certification stamp gleaming in the streetlights. I did not hand it to him. I simply held it up at eye level, forcing him to read the bold, undeniable legal text. "I highly recommend you read the name of the registered property owner on this certified deed," I said, my voice radiating a chilling, impenetrable authority. "Then I suggest you compare it to the identification in my hand. Removing the sole legal owner of a multi-million-dollar estate under the frantic instructions of a delinquent trespassing tenant is not just a breach of contract. It is grounds for a massive civil lawsuit and the immediate, permanent revocation of your firm's private security license." The guard squinted at the document, His eyes scanned the legal description dropped to my corporate holding company and verified my name as the primary managing director. His imposing aggressive posture dissolved in a fraction of a second. He looked up the stairs at Andre, who was sweating profusely under the amber lights, and then looked back at my perfectly calm, unbothered expression. The guard knew exactly who held the real power. He took a sharp step backward, grabbed the velvet rope, and unhooked it himself. "My apologies, Miss Washington," he said, dipping his head in a gesture of sudden, undeniable respect. "Enjoy your evening." I walked up the grand staircase with slow, deliberate precision. Andre watched me ascend, completely paralyzed by his own terror. He could not throw a tantrum. He could not scream or command the guards to physically remove me because 30 of our parents' wealthiest, most influential friends were walking up the steps right behind me, listening to the jazz music and admiring the fake scaffolding. He was trapped in his own web of social optics. I paused right next to him at the threshold of the heavy double doors. I leaned in, bringing my lips just inches from his ear so no one else could hear the devastation in my voice. "Nice scaffolding, Andre," I whispered smoothly. "Tell me, does it come down before or after I send the sheriff to change the locks?" I did not wait for his breathless, panicked response. I stepped past him and glided directly into the grand foyer of my grandmother's house. The interior was a masterclass in financial delusion. Valerie had transformed the historic, deeply meaningful space into a gaudy, overpriced spectacle. Two towering ice sculptures shaped like swans were melting slowly near an extravagant raw bar overflowing with imported seafood. Crystal glasses clinked, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats. It made my stomach turn. This house was purchased through the blood sweat and undeniable grit of a woman who had worked double shifts for 30 years, and they were using it as a disposable stage set to stroke their own fragile egos. Aunt Vivian found me almost immediately. She materialized from the crowd, handing me a crystal flute of sparkling water, her sharp eyes gleaming with absolute predatory anticipation. "You look like a woman about to start a very beautiful fire," Vivian murmured, sipping her own drink. I took the water, letting my gaze sweep across the crowded room. As I moved deeper into the parlor, the atmosphere fundamentally shifted. The music continued, but the conversations closest to me began to drop into hushed, judgmental whispers. Andre's smear campaign had clearly done its toxic work. People were staring at me with a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated disdain, judging the ungrateful, aggressive daughter who had supposedly abandoned her family the second she secured a massive corporate buyout. I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of their collective disapproval, but I kept my spine completely rigid. Across the room, Chloe locked eyes with me. She was wearing a heavily beaded designer gown she definitely could not afford. The moment she saw me, all the color drained from her face. She clearly remembered the $5 million defamation lawsuit I had dropped on her avocado toast at the country club. She grabbed Andre's arm as he rushed up beside her, her knuckles turning bone white as panic set in. Then the jazz band abruptly stopped playing. A sharp, commanding feedback whines from the microphone stationed on a raised platform at the far end of the grand hall. DeAndre stepped up onto the stage, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, looking every bit the proud, undisputed patriarch of our family. He tapped the microphone, commanding the immediate, unquestioning attention of all 250 guests. The room hushed, turning their faces toward the man who believed he controlled everything. "Welcome, family, friends, and esteemed colleagues." DeAndre boomed, his deep baritone resonating off the original crown molding. "Valerie and I stand before you tonight to celebrate 40 years of marriage, 40 years of unyielding dedication, and 40 years of building a legacy that will echo through our bloodline for generations to come." The crowd erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. DeAndre soaked it in, smiling down at Valerie, who stood in the front row, dabbing perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "But a legacy cannot merely be built." DeAndre continued his tone, shifting into something heavier, more profound. "A legacy must be protected. It must be placed in the hands of a steward who possesses the vision, the strength, and the unwavering dedication to carry our family name into the future. Andre, please come up here." Andre practically dragged himself up the 3 wooden steps to the platform. He was sweating so heavily his collar looked damp, but he forced a stiff, agonizingly fake smile for the audience. He stood next to our father, looking like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, desperately waiting for the lever to be pulled. DeAndre placed a heavy, proud hand on Andre's shoulder. This man has poured his heart and soul into preserving this historic brownstone. He has demonstrated a brilliance in business and a dedication to his family that makes me prouder than words can express. DeAndre reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and pulled out a beautiful velvet jewelry box. He snapped it open to reveal a ceremonial set of antique brass keys. "I officially present these keys to my son Andre," DeAndre announced loudly, "the rightful head of our family's future." The room exploded into thunderous applause. Chloe cheered loudly from the front row, trying to maintain the illusion of their massive success. Andre took the box with trembling hands, nodding weakly at the crowd. Then the applause died down, and DeAndre's eyes swept across the room until they locked dead onto me standing near the ice sculptures in my emerald gown. The warm paternal pride vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating superiority. He gripped the microphone tighter, making a deliberate, highly calculated decision to use his moment of ultimate glory to put me in my place in front of the entire city. "We built this legacy on sacrifice and unity," DeAndre boomed over the speakers, his voice taking on a sharp, passive-aggressive edge that cut through the silence. "Because true wealth means absolutely nothing without family loyalty. It is a profound shame that some people in this room severely lack that loyalty. They believe an inflated bank account excuses them from their duties to their blood. They believe money can replace respect. But in our family, loyalty is the only currency that matters." The heavy, suffocating silence returned to the grand hall. 250 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage directly toward me. The judgment in the room was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. They expected me to lower my head. They expected me to shrink away in shame, defeated by the patriarch's public reprimand. They expected me to be humiliated into submission. I did not shrink. I did not look away. I calmly handed my crystal glass to Aunt Vivian. I smoothed the front of my emerald gown, squared my shoulders, and walked forward. The crowd parted for me instantly. It was an involuntary reaction to the sheer terrifying confidence radiating from my posture, slicing open a direct, unobstructed path to the stage. My heels clicked with sharp, rhythmic precision against the original hardwood floors of my grandmother's house. Every single step was a hammer striking the final nail into the coffin of their impending destruction. DeAndre watched me approach, his brow furrowing in deep, aggressive anger. He genuinely thought I was coming up to the stage to apologize. He actually believed his public shaming had worked, and that I was stepping forward to bend the knee and beg for readmittance into his kingdom. Andre, however, looked like a man watching a tidal wave approach the shoreline. He knew exactly what I was capable of, and he knew I was not there to beg. I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the platform without breaking my stride. DeAndre opened his mouth to speak, to assert his dominance over the microphone, but I did not give him the chance. I stepped directly into his personal space, my presence so cold and unyielding that he instinctively leaned back. I wrapped my hand firmly around the neck of the microphone. For a split second, he resisted, his patriarchal pride fighting my grip. I stared directly into his eyes with absolute, terrifying calm. He let go. I turned slowly to face the 250 guests. The silence in the grand hall was so absolute you could hear the distant traffic outside. I looked down at my mother Valerie, standing in the front row in her expensive sequined dress, her hands clasped tightly together in rising panic. I looked at Chloe, who was literally trembling, her eyes darting toward the exits. Finally, I turned my head to look directly at my brother, the golden child, the heir apparent. He was clutching the velvet box with the ceremonial keys so tightly his knuckles were bone white, his chest heaving with silent, hyperventilating breaths. I brought the microphone to my lips. "Thank you for the beautiful speech, Dad," I said, my voice ringing crystal clear and completely steady through the massive speakers, devoid of any anger, but vibrating with absolute, undeniable authority. "And congratulations on the keys, Andre. It is a beautiful sentiment." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the stunned crowd before locking eyes with my brother one final time. It is just a real shame they do not unlock the doors anymore. I raised my left hand, giving a subtle prearranged signal to my head of security, standing near the audiovisual booth at the back of the grand hall. The massive digital screens originally meant to show a romanticized, heavily edited slideshow of my parents' 40-year marriage flickered violently. The soft, nostalgic lighting was instantly replaced by the harsh, glaring white background of scanned legal documents. 250 guests gasped in unison. The text was magnified to a massive scale, making it impossible for anyone in the room to ignore the bold red lettering stamped across the top of the central document. Notice of default. I kept my grip firm on the microphone, letting my voice project with crystal clear precision over the murmuring crowd. I directed their attention to the screens playing the role of a meticulous financial narrator breaking down the anatomy of a scam. What you are looking at, I announced, my voice echoing through the vaulted ceilings, is a $1.2 million commercial line of credit. It was taken out 3 years ago against the equity of this very brownstone. DeAndre stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. He turned around, squinting at the glowing screen. His eyes darted across the dense legal text, searching frantically for a mistake, a typo, any reason to believe this was a malicious prank. But there, blown up to 10 feet tall, was the undeniable signature of his golden son. Andre did not renovate this historic property. I continued, ensuring every syllable carried the weight of absolute truth. He liquidated it. He used the legacy our grandmother built with her own two hands as collateral to fund his failing consulting firm and a lifestyle he could absolutely not afford. Andre tried to lunge for the microphone, his face contorted in sheer desperate panic, but my security detail had already moved to the edge of the stage. Two massive men in tailored suits stepped onto the platform, their presence alone forcing my brother to freeze in his tracks. He was trapped. Look at the expenditure reports displayed on the left screen, I instructed the audience. I am not speaking in hypotheticals. You can see the line items for yourselves. That money did not go into new hardwood floors or upgraded plumbing. It went to luxury car leases. It went to exclusive country club initiation fees, so he could pretend to be a mogul. It went to designer handbags and first-class flights to Europe. He bled this family anchor dry to buy fake prestige. A collective, horrified murmur rolled through the affluent crowd. These were bankers, doctors, and real estate developers. They knew exactly what a notice of default meant. They knew exactly what foreclosure looked like. The illusion of Andre, the brilliant businessman, shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of their eyes. The whispers were immediate and damning. DeAndre grabbed Andre by the lapels of his custom tuxedo. His booming, authoritative voice was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, breathless wheeze. Is this true? Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not mortgage your grandmother's house. Andre opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked out at the sea of judging faces, the very people he had spent his entire life trying to impress, and he visibly crumbled. He was completely exposed, stripped of the unearned arrogance that had shielded his incompetence for 36 years. The sweat pouring down his face was no longer just from the stage lights. It was the physical manifestation of his complete financial and social ruin. Valerie let out a piercing wail from the front row. She clutched her chest, her knees buckling slightly as the reality of the impending financial disaster crashed down on her. She had maxed out her high-yield credit cards to throw a party inside a burning building, and now the flames were licking at her expensive sequined dress. She looked at her son with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. But the most spectacular reaction did not come from my parents. It came from Chloe. She had been standing near the front, holding a glass of imported champagne, basking in the reflected glory of her husband, receiving the ceremonial keys to a multi-million-dollar estate. She was already filming the event for her lifestyle influencer channel, ready to broadcast her supposed wealth to her followers. The moment she realized the documents on the screen meant the money was gone, the carefully constructed facade of the supportive high society wife instantly dissolved. Chloe slammed her champagne flute down onto a nearby cocktail table so hard the crystals shattered, sending shards of glass and expensive wine scattering across the floor. She marched directly up to the edge of the stage, her face flushed with a furious, ugly rage. She did not care about the guests. She did not care about the family legacy. She only cared about her access to capital. What is she talking about? Andre. Chloe shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing loudly in the cavernous space, completely shattering any remaining sense of decorum. Tell me she is lying right now. You said we were millionaires. You told me this house belonged to us free and clear. You promised me we were turning the East Wing into my brand new studio. Andre looked down at his wife, his hands trembling violently as he held the useless ceremonial keys. Chloe, please, just calm down. I can fix this. I just need a little more time to move some capital around. I have investors lined up. Time. Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. The screen says default. The screen says foreclosure. You told me the consulting firm was bringing in 7 figures. You promised me a winter house in Aspen. You told me Maya was just a jealous loser who did not understand real wealth. I am not going to be married to a broke fraud. The entire room watched in stunned fascination as the entitled sister-in-law revealed her absolute materialistic truth. She had never loved Andre. She loved the lifestyle he promised her, a lifestyle funded entirely by stolen generational wealth. And now that the bank accounts were empty, her loyalty evaporated in a fraction of a second. She did not care about his humiliation. She only cared about her own impending poverty. I cannot believe I married into this mess, Chloe spat, looking at my parents with unconcealed disgust. You people are pathetic. You enabled him. You are all fake. My friends at the country club were right about you. I am not going down with this sinking ship. I am not going to let your bankruptcy ruin my brand. She reached up, unclasped the heavy diamond tennis necklace from her throat, and threw it aggressively onto the stage. It hit the wooden floorboards with a sharp clatter, skidding right to Andre's feet. It was a poetic, devastating gesture. The diamonds were undeniably paid for with the same loan that had bankrupted the estate. Chloe did not look back. She hiked up the skirt of her expensive designer gown and stormed right down the center aisle of the grand hall. The guests actively parted to get out of her way, watching in morbid silence as she marched toward the heavy double doors. She shoved them open and disappeared into the city night, completely abandoning her husband on the most humiliating night of his life. I stood on the stage, the microphone still resting comfortably in my hand, watching the total destruction of the golden child. Andre dropped to his knees, staring blankly at the discarded diamond necklace. He was bankrupt. He was publicly disgraced. His wife had just left him in front of 250 people. The kingdom DeAndre had built for him was completely reduced to ash. The silence that blanketed the room after the heavy doors swung shut was absolute. The city's elite, the people my parents had spent 40 years trying to impress, were staring at the stage in varying states of shock and judgment. Andre remained on his knees, a broken, hyperventilating shell of the man who had mocked me for living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely no pity. He had dug his own grave, furnished it with stolen money, and invited the entire city to watch him fall in. I had simply turned on the lights, so everyone could clearly see the dirt on his hands. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Chloe, sealing the absolute destruction of my brother's marriage and his counterfeit life. The echo of those doors seemed to shatter whatever spell had been holding the room hostage. The whispers began. 250 of the most influential people in our city, the judges, the doctors, the real estate moguls, my father had spent decades trying to impress, were now murmuring in a collective, horrified chorus. They were looking at the massive screens projecting the foreclosure notices, then looking down at Andre, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, staring vacantly at the discarded diamond necklace. Valerie was the first to break the physical paralysis. She let out a guttural, desperate gasp and scrambled up the wooden steps of the stage. Her expensive sequined gown snagged on the edge of a monitor cable, but she did not care. The polished upper-class matriarchal facade she had weaponized against me my entire life was completely gone. She stumbled toward me, her hands outstretched, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. "Maya, you have to stop this!" Valerie pleaded, her voice cracking, as tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face. Please tell them this is a mistake. Tell the band to start playing again. You have the $14 million. You can call the bank right now. You can wire the funds and make this all go away. I looked down at the woman who had stood in my foyer less than a week ago and screamed that I was dead to her. I watched her hands trembling as she reached for my arm, begging me to use the very wealth she had dismissed and mocked to save the son who had squandered everything. I did not step back, but I did not reach out to comfort her. I simply let her hands grasp the cold, smooth silk of my emerald gown. The bank does not care about the band playing, Mother, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the microphone still resting in my hand. The bank cares about the $1.2 million your son stole from our ancestors. The bank cares that the auction is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. You cannot sweep a commercial foreclosure under a rug of expensive caterers and ice sculptures. DeAndre finally moved. The towering authoritarian patriarch, who had commanded every room he ever entered, looked as though he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His broad shoulders slumped, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He walked slowly toward the center of the stage, stepping around Andre, as if his golden boy were suddenly radioactive. DeAndre looked at the screens, reading the aggressive legal text of the default notice, and then he turned his gaze to me. For the first time in 33 years, my father looked at me, not as a disappointment, not as a rebellious daughter who refused to fall in line, but as his absolute only salvation. The realization was a bitter, heavy pill that he visibly struggled to swallow. His jaw tightened and he closed his eyes for a brief moment, violently suppressing his pride because his legacy was bleeding out on the stage floor. Maya DeAndre began his booming baritone, reduced to a raspy, pleading tremor. Maya, I am asking you as your father. I am begging you. Do not let them take this house. This is your grandmother's house. This is the history of our family. You know how hard she worked for this property. You know what it means to our bloodline. You have the capital. You can pay off this debt right now and keep the house in the family. We will pay you back. I swear to you, I will work until the day I die to pay you back every single cent. I stared at the man who had forced a pen into my dying grandmother's hand just to ensure my name would never touch the deed. The audacity of him invoking her memory, using her grueling 35 years of labor as a guilt trip to manipulate me into opening my checkbook was staggering. Keep the house in the family, I repeated, letting the microphone amplify the cold, razor-sharp edge in my voice. You did not care about keeping the house in the family when you bypassed probate court to hand it exclusively to Andre. You did not care about preserving her history when you decided my gender made me a financial liability. You handed him the crown jewel of this family, and you did not even bother to check if he was pawning it to buy country club memberships and luxury cars. Valerie dropped to her knees right next to Andre, openly sobbing now. She grabbed my brother by the shoulders and shook him, but Andre remained completely unresponsive, his eyes glazed over in a state of clinical shock. We made a mistake. Valerie wept, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her social dignity. We were wrong, Maya. We were so wrong about you. We see that now. You are brilliant. You are successful. You are the strongest person in this family. Please forgive us. I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot just stand there and let our entire lives be destroyed when you have the power to fix it. We can be a real family again. We can start over. Just write the check, Maya. Please write the check. I listened to her desperate bargains, evaluating the hollow transactional nature of her sudden maternal affection. She did not love me. She loved my liquidity. She was not apologizing for decades of emotional neglect. She was apologizing because she needed a financial bailout. If I wrote that check, she would spend the next 10 years convincing herself and her affluent friends that it was her tough love that had provided me with the funds to save the day. The cycle of manipulation would never actually end. DeAndre took another step closer, holding his hands up in a gesture of complete surrender. I was wrong, Maya. I was a foolish, arrogant old man. I admit it in front of God and everyone in this room. Your brother failed us. He lied to us. But this is about the legacy. If that bank takes this house tomorrow, everything our family built is erased. They will gut the property, they will sell it to some corporate developer. You have to save it. You are the only one who can. Name your terms. Whatever you want, whatever equity stake you demand, we will sign it over to you. Just do not let them take our home. The 250 guests were completely silent, captivated by the raw, brutal dismantling of the most arrogant family in their social circle. They were watching the mighty DeAndre beg for his financial life. They were witnessing the catastrophic collapse of the golden child. And they were staring at the daughter who held the executioner's sword. I let my father's desperate pleading words hang in the heavy, humid air of the grand hall. I looked at Andre broken and humiliated on the floor. I looked at Valerie crying and begging at my feet. I looked at DeAndre offering me whatever equity I wanted just to save his precious patriarchal pride. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice did not shake. It radiated with an absolute terrifying calm that chilled the room to its core. You want me to keep it in the family? I stated, the sound cutting through the sound of Valerie's sobbing. Yes, DeAndre pleaded eagerly, nodding his head with frantic, desperate hope. Yes, Maya, keep it in the family. I turned my head and locked eyes with my head of security at the back of the room. I gave him a second, deliberate nod. It is in the family, I announced, my voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final, inescapable verdict. My family. The massive digital screens behind the stage flickered once more. The glaring red text of the default notice vanished. In its place, a brand new, meticulously scanned legal document materialized, glowing brightly against the dark backdrop of the stage. The guests gasped again, leaning forward to read the crisp, certified text. It was a newly executed property deed. But this deed did not list a commercial bank. It did not list a predatory lending firm, and it absolutely did not list Andre's name. Stamped with the official seal of the county clerk filed seamlessly, just hours prior, the document displayed the name of my corporate holding company as the sole, uncontested, absolute legal owner of the historic brownstone. DeAndre stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He read my corporate entity name, then read the signature of the bank executive transferring the asset. His brain struggled to process the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the strategic chess move I had executed. I did not just buy the debt, Dad, I explained, looking directly into his horrified eyes. I bought the deed. I bought the entire commercial mortgage from the lender. The bank does not own this house anymore. I do. Valerie stopped crying. Her tears completely dried up, replaced by a stunned, breathless paralysis. She looked from the screen to me, her mind failing to comprehend that the daughter she had thrown out of her house was now the legal owner of the very ground she was kneeling on. Andre finally snapped out of his catatonic shock. He scrambled to his feet, his tailored tuxedo wrinkled and stained with champagne. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, desperate rage. You cannot do this. You cannot just steal my property behind my back. I am the legal steward. I have rights. I have tenant rights. You cannot just take my house. I reached into my sleek, structured designer clutch. I bypassed my lipstick and my credit card, sliding my fingers over the crisp, heavy paper folded perfectly inside. I pulled out a formal, legally binding document bearing the bold seal of the county sheriff's department. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my brother. I slapped the document directly against his chest. Instinctively, he brought his hands up, grabbing the paper before it could fall to the floor. You do not have a house, Andre, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that was amplified perfectly by the microphone. And you certainly do not have tenant rights when you commit commercial mortgage fraud. That is an official court-ordered notice to vacate. You have exactly 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my property before my security team physically throws whatever is left out onto the sidewalk. You are officially evicted. Andre stared at the eviction notice, his hands shaking so violently, the paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. He looked at DeAndre for help, but our father was staring blankly at the massive screen, completely broken by the realization that his patriarchal kingdom had been legally and financially conquered by the daughter he had discarded. I turned my back on my parents and my brother, facing the crowd of 250 guests who were watching the climax of this incredible reckoning. I walked to the edge of the stage, standing tall, radiant, and absolutely victorious in my emerald gown. To the guests who came tonight, expecting to celebrate a 40-year legacy of success, I apologize for the disruption in the catering schedule. I announced my tone, transforming into the polished, commanding voice of a $14 million corporate founder. But I believe it is important to be transparent about the future of this historic property. I gestured to the beautiful vaulted ceilings and the original hardwood floors that my grandmother had worked so tirelessly to secure. My grandmother fought through decades of systemic barriers to acquire this space. She believed in the power of Black women building their own futures. For years, that vision was corrupted by men who believed they were entitled to her wealth simply because they were born male. That ends tonight. The crowd hung on my every word, completely mesmerized by the sheer power radiating from the stage. Starting next month, this historic brownstone will no longer serve as a prop for fake renovations or a collateral asset for luxury cars, I declared proudly. I am fully funding and repurposing this entire estate into a high-tech incubator and venture capital hub specifically designed for young Black female entrepreneurs. I am going to take the brilliant, struggling dreamers who are currently working out of their basements, the women who are constantly told to get a real job, the women who are denied seed money by traditional banks, and I am going to give them the capital, the office space, and the mentorship they need to build their own empires. We are going to build the future right here in my grandmother's house. A spontaneous, overwhelming wave of applause erupted from the back of the room. It started with a few younger professionals and quickly spread, rippling through the crowd until nearly half the guests were clapping, recognizing the brilliant, poetic justice of my business plan. I turned around one final time. DeAndre, Valerie, and Andre were standing together on the stage, completely isolated, stripped of their power, their money, and their social standing. They were trapped in the ashes of their own arrogance, staring at the woman they could no longer control, manipulate, or diminish. I walked over to DeAndre. I held out my hand, offering him the microphone. He took it with a trembling, defeated grip, unable to even look me in the eye. "Enjoy the rest of your anniversary party, Dad," I said softly. "Make sure you lock up when you leave." I walked down the 3 wooden steps of the stage, my head held high. The crowd parted for me instantly, offering respectful nods and stunned smiles as I moved through the grand hall. I reached the back of the room where Aunt Vivian was waiting by the heavy double doors. She was beaming with a fierce, profound pride, holding her crystal glass high in a silent salute. I linked my arm through hers. We pushed the heavy oak doors open together, stepping out into the cool, vibrant energy of the city night. The jazz band had long stopped playing, but the sound of my own undeniable success was the only music I needed to hear. I had not just survived their cruelty. I had bought the battlefield, changed the rules, and built my own empire. And my revenge was absolute, perfect, unstoppable success. The ultimate lesson from Maya's empowering journey is that biological ties never excuse emotional or financial abuse. True wealth is not merely about accumulating millions in the bank. It is about possessing the absolute autonomy to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. For decades, Maya's family expected her to shrink herself to protect the golden child's fragile ego and blindly bankroll their meticulously crafted social facade. However, by establishing ironclad boundaries and achieving undeniable financial independence, she definitively proved that you cannot negotiate with toxic entitlement. Maya's story profoundly teaches us that sometimes the hardest yet most necessary decision a woman can make is to sever the toxic roots of her own family tree to protect the empire she built from the ground up. You absolutely do not owe your success, your hard-earned resources, or your peace of mind to those who actively participated in your struggles or secretly prayed for your downfall. Protecting your mental health and your financial legacy is the absolute highest form of self-love. Blood might make you related, but unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and genuine support are what actually constitute a real family. Have you ever had to draw a hard financial or emotional boundary to protect your peace from toxic relatives? Share your ultimate survival story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering content.